Was Job a real person? Is the book of Job the oldest book in the Bible? Welcome back to Bible and Culture with Dr. Armstrong, where we're going to dive into these long-standing questions. The number one question I get asked from Jews is, was Job a real person? There's a debate in the Talmud about whether or not God could actually do this to someone. This reflects the question of whether God's character is consistent in Job with that of the rest of the Bible. This exact question is raised by Job himself throughout the book. The number one question I get asked by Christians: is Job really the oldest book in the Bible? This reflects an acknowledgement of the unique language and setting of the book of Job. Let's set the stage. The book of Job was written in Hebrew in the ancient Near East and ended up in the Bible. Hebrew is one of several Semitic languages spoken in the region. Other ancient texts from nearby Semitic dialects offer insight into the culture, stories, and literary genres that were popular at the time. People in the ancient Near East had mascot gods or patron gods. The god of the Hebrew speakers was Yahweh. Hebrew speakers lived in two small city-states called Israel and Judah, and they were surrounded by major empires of Mesopotamia and Egypt. Eventually, they were exiled, uprooted from their homes, and forced to live in Mesopotamia. The most famous phase was the Babylonian exile, which lasted about 50 years. The exile ended when the Persian Empire conquered the Babylonian Empire and let the exiles go home. Clues indicate that the book of Job was written during this post-exilic Persian period. For example, chapter 1's description of the Chaldean troops in the Arabian desert sounds like their operations during the exilic period. In chapter 19, Job breaks the fourth wall and makes a joke about the famous Pisittun inscription. See my earlier video on that. There's a rich tradition, mostly Jewish, but also inherited by Christians, that the book of Job was written by Moses long before the exile ever happened. This claim would ease any tension between Job and passages like Deuteronomy 28, but the style and the dating is very different from the Torah, and there's no real evidence that Moses wrote any of it. The first fivefold book of the Bible is called the Torah. In this book, Yahweh creates the world, chooses Abraham and his descendants, and eventually gives them a law code. While the Torah is extremely complex, there are passages like Deuteronomy 28 which make it sound like God is going to bless people who are righteous and curse people who are wicked. Specifically, that another nation will come and conquer them. This is a popular theology of the rich, right? I must be prospering because I'm so righteous. Well, of course, there's another strain in the Bible that says, hey, I'm righteous. How come I'm not rich? How come I'm suffering? Why are wicked people rich? The next section of the Bible is called the Former Prophets, which contains stories of Israel and Judah leading up to the exile. Many of these stories uphold the ideas of Deuteronomy 28 by saying that wickedness is what led to the exile. The next section of the Bible is called the Latter Prophets. Many of these books are about preachers or prophets who try to warn Israel that if they keep being wicked, God's going to send someone to take them into the exile. Scholar Ed Greenstein points out that books like Jeremiah inspired Job. Jeremiah deals with a paradox where he preaches impending doom for the wicked while he himself is suffering because he's righteous. Because he's righteous. And his book has a lot of famous protests against God. The final section of the Bible is called the Writings, which is where we find the book of Job today. This contains literary folk tales, poetry collections, and post-exilic history. Some of the writings were known to the authors of Job. Three of these, Job, Proverbs, and Ecclesiastes, are associated with a wisdom school. This wisdom school tried to learn from tradition, nature, and experience. The way Lewis Carroll grew up reading Pilgrim's Progress, the fairy tales of Hans Christian Andersen, Grimm brothers, authors of Job grew up reading Deuteronomy, Jeremiah, and Psalms. You can see Job wrestle with these texts in a similar way. Notice how much the book of Job stands out in the Bible. As you're reading through the Bible, you're learning about the history of Israel. Then all of a sudden the story stops, and you're whisked away to long ago in a galaxy far, far away that supposedly has nothing to do with Israel. So, is Job the oldest book in the Bible? No. But this question reflects an important aspect of the book. It was written in a unique dialect of Hebrew to show that it takes place in an ancient time in a foreign land. We call this an I dialect. Think of the way Mark Twain and Charles Dickens represent a character's accent on the page. Huck Finn says, When a chap had pulled a skiff out most to it, they'd raise up and laugh at him, but it weren't so this time. Now, the I dialect in Job is not always so consistent. Sometimes Hebrew words are written in Aramaic forms, and Aramaic words are written in Hebrew forms. This indicates that it's not representing an actual spoken dialect. The I dialect is a literary device that gives the book an ancient and foreign flavor. But the addition of foreign and archaic elements to the Hebrew language also give poets a lot more tools for wordplay. Job is introduced in a way that sounds very much like the ancient founders of Israel. His cattle and his sheep are described very much like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the book of Genesis. The origins of Job and his friends often seem to come from people names in Genesis rather than actual places. All of this makes it sound very foreign and very ancient. Alright, so the book of Job is designed to sound ancient and foreign. But was Job a real person? First, there was probably a famous legend floating around about an ancient man named Job. Ezekiel 14 talks about Job along with Noah and Daniel, who are legendary figures known for their righteousness and their attempts to save their children. Now, you might know of Noah's righteousness and his attempts to save his children from the book of Genesis. Daniel's righteousness and his attempts to save his children were found in texts just north of Israel, written in a dialect very similar to Hebrew called Ugaritic, which I've talked about in a previous video. It's likely there was also a common legend in the ancient world about a super righteous man named Job who tried to save his children with his righteousness. Now, second, as we've already talked about, the book of Job is a rap battle. Each chapter in the book of Job is written in beautiful, eloquent poetry that would take forever to write. And there are visual jokes that you can only get if you see the words next to each other. So, even if they're real people, Job and his friends probably didn't say these exact words when they're having this conversation in history, right? The author of Job took an ancient legend and made a hip-hop musical out of it. Pope Gregory points out that Job's hometown of Uz, or Utz, is very similar to a Hebrew word that means wise counsel. Funny, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of wise counsel in the town of Wise Counsel, does there? In fact, God brings this term up in chapter 38, when God says, "Who is this, who darkens counsel, and words without knowledge?" Well, yes, of course. Scholars very often believe that that's the voice that God spoke in the book of Job. So even if Job actually existed, this literary retelling takes some creative license. So at the end, the book of Job was written during a time of great reflection. As the exile was coming to a close, the author's generation was looking back at these earlier texts that said how they got there. And the authors of Job wanted to ask deeper questions about whether suffering is always deserved or whether riches are always deserved. Thank you for tuning in to Bible and Culture. Please like and subscribe and leave a comment down below. I really love those discussions that we have below the videos. And thank you so much for watching. Dr. Armstrong out.